March 1943. Japan sends 8 transports and 8 destroyers racing through daylight to save its New Guinea garrison, confident that heavy guns and precise maneuvers will outwit any Allied bomber. Their doctrine is unshakable, their overland gamble unthinkable to lose. But an enemy innovation is about to turn their textbook defense inside out. The title promises the shocking truth about what Japan thought of the A-20 Havoc. The real story is how a single American aircraft, modified into a mass-skimming, gun-blazing strafer, not only wiped out Japan's vital convoy, but shattered the very logic behind imperial naval warfare. If Japan's own diaries confess the impact, what did the men at sea feel when everything they believed fell apart? Dawn broke over Simpson Harbor as 8 transports and 8 destroyers cut their engines to life. The Japanese convoy, codenamed Operation 81, slipped out of Rabaul on February 28, 1943, carrying nearly 7,000 troops bound for Leh. Each ship was loaded to its limits. Troops from the 20th and 41st Divisions, ammunition, fuel, and all the supplies needed to hold the New Guinea front. Rear Admiral Masatomi Kimura, a veteran of Guadalcanal, took command from the bridge of Shirayuki. He had the best destroyers the Navy could spare: Shikanami, Uranami, Tokitsukaze, Yukikaze, Asashio, Arashio, and Asagumo, all battle-tested, all bristling with anti-aircraft guns. The convoy's formation was tight, the order of march rehearsed down to the minute. Destroyers flanked the transports, their gunners alert at every station. Each man aboard knew the route: west along the north coast of New Britain, then a swing south into the Bismarck Sea, aiming for Leh's battered docks. The plan called for daylight sailing, a decision made with cold calculation. Japanese staff believed that with enough firepower and fighter cover over 100 aircraft promised overhead, the convoy could force its way through Allied air patrols. Daylight meant speed and coordination. Night meant risk of collision, hidden reefs, and the constant threat of submarines lurking unseen. Confidence ran high among the officers. Previous convoys had survived even under attack. The doctrine was clear: concentrated anti-aircraft fire, tight discipline, and rapid evasive maneuvers would break up any bombing run. Captains drilled their crews to turn bow on to incoming aircraft, minimizing their ships' profiles. Every gun was checked and rechecked, ammunition stacked in easy reach. The Japanese command trusted their escort tactics, convinced that Allied bombers would come from altitude, just as they always had. As the convoy steamed west, coded signals flashed back to Rabaul and onward to Tokyo. The operation scale was unmistakable. Nearly the entire available destroyer force in the area, all committed in a single high-stakes push. There was no backup plan. If the convoy failed, Leh would be left to wither. Officers on the bridge watched the horizon, scanning for the first sign of enemy aircraft. Below decks, soldiers crowded shoulder to shoulder, trusting in the Navy's guns and the precision of their commanders. The gamble was underway, and every man aboard knew that the fate of Japan's New Guinea campaign rode on these ships reaching their destination. Japanese naval doctrine in early 1943 rested on a foundation of calculation, not bravado. Years of fleet exercises and convoy runs had taught staff officers to trust in discipline and the mathematics of firepower. Destroyer training manuals drilled crews on the principle of mutual defense, each ship overlapping its anti-aircraft arcs, each gun captain trained to track bombers at set altitudes, each maneuver rehearsed until it became muscle memory. The standard was barrage fire, heavy and light anti-aircraft guns working in concert, creating a curtain of lead that no pilot could cross without risk. The Type 96 25mm, bristling on every deck, was considered the backbone of this defense. Gunners trained to reload in seconds, firing in short, precise bursts to conserve ammunition and avoid barrel overheating. Convoy doctrine called for tight formations, with destroyers at the flanks and rear, transports in the center, and each vessel assigned a sector of responsibility. The logic was simple. A dispersed convoy was easy prey, but a compact one could concentrate its fire and present a moving wall of steel. Japanese staff papers from late 1942 noted the success of previous daylight convoys across the Bismarck Sea, where even under attack, most ships survived by holding formation and executing evasive turns on command. The defensive playbook prescribed a sharp turn bow-on to incoming aircraft, minimizing the target area and bringing the heaviest guns to bear. This maneuver, practiced repeatedly in peacetime drills, was believed to break up bombing runs and scatter bomb patterns, reducing the odds of a direct hit. The doctrine extended to air cover as well. Fighter squadrons were tasked with intercepting enemy bombers before they reached the convoy, but the staff planners never assumed air cover alone would be enough. The destroyer's anti-aircraft batteries were the last line of defense, and every officer trusted that discipline and volume of fire would compensate for any shortfall in fighter protection. After-action reports from earlier convoys reinforced this belief. Even when attacked, most ships reached their destination, and the losses were deemed acceptable given the supplies delivered to the front. In staff conferences at Rabaul, the consensus was clear. With enough guns, enough discipline, and the right maneuvers, daylight runs were not just possible. They were necessary to keep the campaign alive. This confidence was not blind. Officers understood the risks, but the alternatives, night runs through reef-choked waters or piecemeal barge traffic, were judged even more dangerous. The manuals, the war games, the hard lessons from the South China Sea all pointed to the same conclusion. Daylight, discipline, and concentrated firepower gave the best chance of survival. As Operation 81 steamed toward Leh, every captain on the bridge believed that the doctrine would hold, just as it had before. The playbook was clear. The enemy would come from above and the convoy would answer with fire and steel. In a dusty corner of an Australian workshop, Pappy Gunn eyed the A-20 Havoc's glass nose and saw dead weight. The Pacific didn't need high-altitude bombers. It needed predators. Gunn, a Navy veteran turned maverick engineer, gathered his crew and set to work. The bombardier's seat, the bomb sight, the delicate panes, all came out. In their place, Gunn's team bolted a solid metal nose, packing it tight with 6.50 caliber machine guns, sometimes 8 if they could scrounge the parts. Ammunition belts snaked back into the fuselage, feeding hundreds of rounds per gun, enough for a full-throttle attack run. Mechanics welded, riveted, and rewired, improvising feed chutes and ejection ports from whatever scrap they could find. Each gun was test-fired, checked for jams, then rechecked. The nose of the Havoc now bristled like a wolf's muzzle, every inch of space devoted to firepower. But firepower alone wasn't enough. Gunn knew the distances in New Guinea would cripple any aircraft with standard tanks. He ordered extra fuel cells, 2 450-gallon tanks, slotted into the bomb bay. That meant fewer bombs, but it also meant the Havoc could reach Japanese convoys hiding behind the Owen Stanleys and still make it home. Every modification was a gamble. More weight, more stress on the airframe, more to go wrong. But Gunn's confidence was infectious. His crew worked through the night, adapting machine guns scavenged from crashed P-39s and P-40s. Ammunition boxes were custom-built and tested for vibration. The solid nose was reinforced to handle the recoil, and the aircraft's center of gravity was recalculated with every change. By late 1942, the first of these modified A-20s rolled out, their noses gleaming with gunmetal and promise. Gunn's workshop had turned a light bomber into a low-flying predator, a strafer built for the kind of close-quarters violence the Pacific demanded. These weren't factory specs. They were battlefield solutions, hammered out by men who understood that survival depended on outgunning, outrunning, and outthinking the enemy. The A-20 was now ready for a new kind of war, one fought at wave-top height where speed and firepower decided everything in seconds. Gunn watched as the first crews climbed aboard, the old glass nose replaced by a wall of steel and lead. The monster was awake, and it was hungry. Pilots hunched over their controls, eyes locked on the horizon, as the A-20 Havocs and B-25s knifed toward the water's surface. The plan demanded more than courage. It demanded precision. Training began in the shadow of the SS Pruth, a rusted liner stranded off Port Moresby since 1923. Here, crews rehearsed a new kind of attack, one that defied every rule written in Allied bombing manuals. Instead of climbing for altitude, they dropped to wave-top height, skimming so low that salt spray rattled against the fuselage. B-25s and A-20s took turns in the circuit, each run a test of nerves and timing. Bombardiers learned to ignore their Norden sights. Instead, they watched the ship's mast, waited for the moment it filled the windscreen, and released their bombs just 50 feet above the water. The bombs, fitted with 4 to 5 second delay fuses, struck the sea and ricocheted forward, skipping across the surface like stones. When they hit, the impact sent up a plume so tall and narrow that Japanese lookouts mistook it for a torpedo strike. The deception worked both ways. Japanese doctrine called for ships to turn bow on to torpedo planes, narrowing their profile. But that maneuver exposed the decks, giving the A-20s a clean shot at every gun crew and bridge. Gunn's modified Havocs, their noses bristling with .50 caliber firepower, swept the decks with a hurricane of bullets. Each gun run blinded anti-aircraft positions, clearing a path for the bombers behind. Australian and American crews drilled in tandem, refining the choreography until it became instinct. 2 plane elements attacked in sequence, one to strafe, one to bomb, each pass coordinated to the second. Training reports from late 1942 show crews achieving hit rates above 80% against the stationary Pruth. Instructors measured success by the scars pockmarking the wreck's hull, each new crater a promise of what was to come. Every detail mattered. Pilots learned to ride the ground effect, using the cushion of air just above the waves to mask their approach. Bomb release points were marked with grease pencils on cockpit glass, a hasty fix that paid off in combat. Ordnance teams reworked fuses, fine-tuning the delay so bombs detonated just as they reached the target's hull or slipped beneath the keel. The SS Pruth became more than a practice hulk. It was the crucible where Allied airmen turned theory into muscle memory. By early 1943, the crews were ready. The deception was set. Japanese convoy commanders, drilled to expect attacks from above, would soon face a threat that came at them level with the sea, fast and impossible to counter. The trap was nearly complete. At first light on March 3rd, the Bismarck Sea churned with the wake of 16 Japanese ships, each one locked tight in formation. The air was heavy with diesel smoke and the tension of men who had drilled for this moment. But what swept in from the south wasn't the attack they'd prepared for. Allied aircraft appeared at wave-top height. engines screaming, noses bristling with guns. The first to strike were the RAAF Beaufighters, racing in low, their cannons blazing. Gunners on the destroyer snapped off bursts, but the Allied pilots held their line, raking the decks from bow to stern. The sound of .50 caliber fire drowned out commands as gun crews fell and bridge windows shattered. A-20 Havocs followed, their modified noses packed with 6 machine guns each. Pilots like Lieutenant Don McLean pressed in so low that salt spray spattered the windscreen, holding fire until the last 100 yards. The lead Havoc carved a path through the anti-aircraft guns, bullets chewing through steel and flesh. Japanese officers, drilled to turn bow on to torpedo planes, swung their ships directly into the attack. The maneuver that once saved them now exposed every deck and gun crew. Within seconds, the defensive wall collapsed. Behind the strafers, B-25s dropped to mast height, bombs armed with 4-second delay fuses slamming the water and skipping up into hulls. The first bomb struck Shirayuki and Nojima Maru, sending geysers of water and steel skyward. On the bridge of Tokitsukaze, Captain Tomura watched a bomb skip twice, tear through the forecastle and detonate in the engine room. The destroyer shuddered, dead in the water. Damien Perrer, wedged behind the pilot in a Beaufighter, captured the chaos. Ships burning, men leaping for the sea, decks swept clean by gunfire. Crew diaries from the 22nd Squadron recorded the smell of cordite, the sight of lifeboats splintered by strafing runs. Within 20 minutes, 4 transports and 2 destroyers were ablaze or sinking. The second wave hit as survivors scrambled for rafts. A-20s returned, gunning down any position that moved. B-25s finished the crippled ships with direct hits at point-blank range. One pilot wrote later, "We could see the faces at the guns. They never had a chance." By dusk, the sea was littered with burning wrecks and oil slicks. Of the 16 ships that set out, half were gone. The Japanese doctrine, tight formation, overlapping fire, discipline maneuvers, had failed in a single morning. The survivors, scattered among the debris, watched the sky for another wave, knowing the playbook that had once protected them was now useless. The shock on the bridges and in the engine rooms was total. The old rules no longer applied. Masatake Okumiya, staff officer at Rabaul, did not mince words when asked about the aftermath of the Bismarck Sea. His post-war account reads like a verdict. "Our losses for this single battle were fantastic." The numbers alone stunned the high command. 8 transports and 4 destroyers lost. Nearly 3,000 men gone in 72 hours. But what followed in the Japanese war diary mattered even more than the casualty lists. With that convoy, Japan's ability to reinforce New Guinea by daylight simply ended. Operational orders changed overnight. The ban on sunlit supply transits to Lae and the North Coast went into effect before the last oil fires had burned out on the sea. Headquarters memos, later captured by Allied intelligence, documented the new reality. No more large convoys east of Wewak, no more destroyer runs in daylight. Cargo ships that once steamed under the guns of the fleet now slipped out only at night, hugging coastlines, dodging Allied search planes, or breaking up into small barge flotillas. Japanese staff records from March 1943 show a sudden spike in requests for submarines and small craft, a desperate attempt to keep isolated garrisons alive by any means except open water convoys. Okumiya's own words, recorded during post-war interrogation, left no doubt about the psychological blow. "We knew we could no longer run cargo ships or even fast destroyer transports to any front on the north coast of New Guinea, east of Wewak." The verdict was not just tactical, it was doctrinal. The old faith in overlapping anti-aircraft fire and disciplined maneuver had been shattered. After action memos from the Combined Fleet's Operations Section, examined by U.S. Naval Technical Mission officers, confirmed the shift. Daylight convoying was finished, and with it, any hope of rapid reinforcement for the New Guinea front. The shock ran deeper than the loss of ships. Japanese planners, once confident in their defensive playbook, now faced a logistics map rewritten in a single week. No more direct routes past Leh. No more reliance on destroyer speed to outrun Allied bombers. The A-20's low-level attacks had not just broken hulls, they had broken the logic of Japanese supply strategy. Every subsequent convoy order, every routing change stamped in headquarters files, carried the signature of Bismarck Sea. The enemy's own records became the final proof that the strafer concept had done what no high-altitude raid ever could. It forced Japan to abandon daylight control of the sea. In just 3 days in March 1943, every Japanese transport in Operation 81 was sunk and 4 destroyers lost. Nearly 2,900 lives in a single battle. Allied innovation transformed the A-20 Havoc into a low-flying strafer, exploiting gaps in Japanese doctrine that were documented in both Allied tactical manuals and Japanese post-war interrogations. Masatake Okumiya's admission, "Our losses for this single battle were fantastic," is echoed in operational orders that abruptly ended all daylight convoy runs to New Guinea. Yet, some Japanese internal discussions and convoy loss totals remain classified or incomplete. What is clear from captured documents and Allied records is that the Battle of the Bismarck Sea forced a permanent shift. Japan ceded control of vital shipping lanes, and the A-20's success marked a turning point in Pacific air-sea warfare. The evidence leaves no doubt. The A-20 Havoc shattered Japan's convoy confidence and rewrote the rules of engagement in the Pacific.